The Academy dome shimmered under the pale light of Kepler's distant star, its curved walls humming with the faint resonance of the containment field that separated the cadets from the simulation grounds. Beyond the barrier stretched a biome that no real world could sustain for long, an engineered wilderness designed to test survival skills against odds that seemed unwinnable. Strange vegetation with metallic leaves bent under invisible winds, streams laced with luminous algae cut across the ground like glowing veins, and the air itself shifted in temperature in irregular waves, as though the place was alive and temperamental. It was the arena for what every student whispered about with dread, the perfect capture exam, a task that had never once been completed in full in all the Academy's long record of trials. The instructors gathered at the observation platform, their silhouettes stern against the light. Among them stood Commander Jashkor, a reptilian officer whose scarred face marked him as a veteran of real planetary campaigns. His eyes narrowed with almost ceremonial contempt as he briefed the cadets, his voice vibrating through the translator field. 10 alien species, each drawn from worlds scattered across the spiral arms, roamed this fabricated biome. The cadets had to capture them all alive. Not one species could be killed, not one trap could cause lethal harm. Most cadets already knew from hushed rumor that only a handful even managed to capture 6 before failing the trial. None had captured all 10. This, Commander Jashkor intoned, is the difference between strategy and desperation. Your weapons will not save you. Only your ability to adapt dozens of alien cadets shuffled uneasily. A crystalline Murin cadet adjusted his refractive arms nervously. A tall insectoid female named Sirek clicked her mandibles in agitation, her antennae twitching as she scanned the terrain. Beside her, a broad-shouldered amphibian male adjusted the straps on his plasma net thrower. Everyone's eyes betrayed unease, yet all clung to the belief that their technology, their Academy-forged devices, would be enough. Among them stood Eliza Morgan, the only human cadet in this rotation. She had tied her dark hair back in a no-nonsense knot, her uniform simple, her belt nearly bare compared to the heavy gear strapped across her peers. Where others carried rifles, nets, sonic lures, and cages shimmering with kinetic restraints, she carried only a coil of standard rope, a survival knife, and a small pouch that clinked with nothing more advanced than flint and steel. When she stood with her hands lightly resting against her hips, she looked less like a warrior and more like someone waiting for the weather to break. The simulation's countdown flashed in the sky, numbers appearing in streaks of light. 5 minutes until entry. Eliza's peers whispered among themselves, some mocking in low tones, others genuinely baffled. A scaled male cadet from Arcturus muttered that she had come unprepared. A crystalline student asked if perhaps humans were issued secret devices. Eliza heard them but kept her gaze fixed on the terrain. Her eyes were not on the hostile creatures that prowled just out of sight, but on the way the vines looped over branches, the way fallen logs had split along grain lines, the way water trickled through channels in the soil. She noticed things the others dismissed as background noise, things that centuries of human trial and error had etched into instinct. When the countdown hit 0, the barrier dissolved into mist, and the trial began. The cadets surged forward as though charging into battle. Plasma nets crackled, cages unfolded from compact packs, and energy scanners blinked rapidly as they mapped the biome. Each cadet aimed to prove himself or herself through speed and firepower. Eliza stepped forward with measured calm, her boots sinking lightly into the loam. She bent down, ran her hand along the soil, and picked up a thin stick. She balanced it across her palm, feeling its weight and texture, then placed it in her belt. To the others, she looked ridiculous, arming herself with nothing while predators howled in the distance. But to her, every small object in this place was a potential tool. The first hour turned into chaos. A group of cadets from aquatic species clustered near a glowing stream, setting up electric nets to block fish-like creatures with elongated fins that glowed in ultraviolet light. But when the first school darted by, the nets failed, the creatures slipping through with a speed that mocked technology. The amphibian cadet cursed, his webbed hands slapping the control pad in frustration. Elsewhere, the crystalline student attempted to deploy a cage on a crawler, only to find the creature clever enough to slip under the bars before they locked. Panic rippled through the ranks as one cadet after another realized that equipment designed for certainty faltered when matched against wild instinct. Eliza did not rush toward the chaos. She followed a narrow trail where the underbrush thickened, her eyes scanning for sign. She had learned long before the academy that every creature leaves its mark: a bent blade of grass, a scrape against bark, a print in damp soil. Her patience rewarded her quickly. She spotted a series of claw marks near a fallen tree, leading toward a hollow. She crouched, ran her fingers lightly over the impressions, and understood at once which species it was. The razorback crawler, a predator no larger than a dog, but known for speed and teeth like serrated blades. Other cadets had failed against this one many times before. Its agility made nets useless, and its instincts allowed it to dodge stun bolts. Eliza studied the ground, then set to work. She gathered 3 sticks of varying lengths, 1 small flat stone, and several vines. Kneeling, she began to fit the pieces together, her motions precise and practiced. A figure 4 deadfall trap, simple in principle, flawless in execution. She balanced the stone so delicately that a whisper could collapse it. Over it, she stacked a crude cage of interlocked branches. For bait, she dug into her pouch and withdrew a small strip of ration bar, something sweet enough to lure the crawler's keen nose. She placed it just beneath the stone and stepped back, her heart steady, her breathing calm. Then she waited, crouched behind the underbrush, watching with unwavering patience. Minutes passed before the crawler appeared, its scaled back arched with jagged spines, its head twitching left and right as it tested the air. It slunk forward on clawed feet, nostrils flaring. When it reached the bait, it hesitated, then lunged. The trigger collapsed, the stone fell, and the branch cage dropped perfectly into place. The crawler snapped its jaws in fury, clawing against the branches, but the trap held firm. Eliza stepped out of the brush, her face unreadable, her eyes steady. With a short length of vine, she secured the cage and marked the capture with the academy beacon. The instructors watching from above leaned toward the screens, their expressions unreadable. The first capture had been made, not with plasma or steel, but with wood, vine, and patience. The alien cadets who had mocked her earlier now stared with something between disbelief and awe. The razorback crawler, a test that often took entire teams hours to subdue, had been captured in under 15 minutes by a single human armed with sticks. Eliza did not pause for applause. She tightened her belt, retrieved more vines, and slipped quietly deeper into the forest. She knew this was only the beginning. The exam was designed to break confidence, to crush cadets under the weight of failure. But as far as she was concerned, the wilderness was not an enemy. It was a puzzle, and every puzzle could be solved if one understood the pieces. The chaos of plasma fire echoed behind her, along with the shouts of frustrated cadets. Eliza Morgan walked forward in silence, eyes sharp, every step measured. Somewhere in the fabricated jungle, 9 more species awaited her. She knew that none of them were impossible. She only had to remember the lessons her ancestors had learned the hard way, long before machines had promised easy answers. She tightened her grip on the stick at her belt and smiled faintly, a calm, almost private smile. The impossible exam had just begun, and for the first time in the Academy's history, someone was walking into it without fear. Eliza moved deeper into the artificial jungle, her boots pressing into soil that smelled faintly metallic, as though the engineers who had designed this trial could never quite replicate the scent of real earth. The canopy overhead filtered the strange star's pale light into fragments, painting the undergrowth in fractured shadows. Her ears caught the faint call of unseen creatures, some sounding like distorted bird cries, others like rattling stones rolling together. The biome was a careful blend of hazards designed to disorient cadets, but she treated it with the same quiet attention that she had once given to the woods near her childhood home. She paused when she came upon a clearing shaped by fallen trunks, their bark rotting in the damp heat. A faint ripple across the soil caught her eye, a trail of movement that broke the pattern of leaf litter. She crouched low, fingers brushing the faint impression of tiny talons. Her lips tightened into the beginning of a plan. This was not another predator. It was a forager, one of the 10 assigned species, known for its darting speed and obsessive hoarding instinct. The Academy instructors had chosen it precisely because its nimbleness defeated nets and its cleverness outwitted cages. Most cadets wasted hours chasing it until exhaustion or frustration drove them to mistakes. Eliza studied the trail, then followed it at a careful distance. She shifted her weight onto the outer edges of her boots, letting the ground absorb her steps. She had learned long ago that silence was not the absence of noise, but the presence of the right kind. A leaf rustling underfoot meant nothing if it blended with the natural chorus, but a snapped twig in still air betrayed even the most skilled hunter. She listened to the forest, tuned her movements into its rhythm, and became part of the living soundscape rather than a foreign body disturbing it. The trail led to a cluster of roots jutting out of the ground like claws. Within the shadows, she glimpsed the forager, a creature with elongated limbs covered in fine scales that shimmered faintly when it shifted. Its narrow snout twitched as it examined a pile of gathered seed pods, shoving them into a cavity in the roots. Its movements were frantic, purposeful, and utterly predictable. It was building a store, returning again and again with single-minded focus. Eliza knew better than to rush it. She slid her knife from her belt, not to harm, but to shape. She cut several lengths of vine, pulling them taut to test their strength. Then she sought out 2 branches of equal length and another shorter one with a natural bend. She worked quickly but carefully, twisting the vines into knots that would hold without slipping. Her hands moved with practiced familiarity, her fingers steady even as distant roars echoed through the jungle. She fashioned a simple snare, the kind her ancestors might have used thousands of years earlier when survival depended on ingenuity rather than firepower. The loop of vine rested flat on the soil, concealed beneath scattered leaves. She anchored the mechanism to a bent branch, wedging it into the earth so that the smallest tug would release its tension. She set the trigger with delicate precision, then placed a handful of bright pods near the loop, just enough to draw the forager's attention. She retreated to the shadows and waited. The air was heavy with humidity, clinging to her skin like a second layer. Her heartbeat slowed as she focused, eyes locked on the creature. The forager darted forward, its body low, claws scraping softly against the soil. It paused, sniffed, and then seized one of the pods. Its movement tugged the trigger. In an instant, the loop tightened, securing around its midsection. The branch snapped upward with force, hoisting the creature into the air. It thrashed, shrieking in high-pitched tones, but the snare held firm. Eliza approached slowly, her knife ready to cut away if the tension risked injury. She studied the creature's struggles, ensured the loop pressed against scales rather than flesh, and adjusted the vines so it dangled securely without harm. Then she activated the Academy beacon to mark the capture. The forager's store of pods spilled across the ground, but her eyes lingered not on the food, but on the creature itself. Its panic was real, its instinct undeniable. Yet it had fallen to a trap made of nothing more than patience, observation, and the natural tools around her. In the distance, a cry of frustration carried through the air. She turned her head slightly and saw an amphibian cadet crashing through the underbrush, his plasma net sparking uselessly as another creature darted free. He cursed loudly, striking the net against a trunk, the noise echoing like an admission of failure. His eyes caught sight of Eliza's success, and his jaw clenched with anger. She gave him no more than a brief glance before turning back to her work. His frustration was his problem. Her focus remained on the task at hand. She cut the vines carefully, lowered the captured forager into a crude cage she had fashioned from crossed branches, and secured it with knots. It hissed at her, but its strength was limited, its claws unable to cut through the bindings. She set the cage near a marked stone for collection and dusted her hands clean. 2 species now accounted for, 8 more awaited her somewhere in the depths of the biome. Eliza straightened, rolling her shoulders back, feeling the ache of crouching in the damp for so long. She breathed in deeply, tasting the air, noting the subtle shift in its flavor. A storm simulation was beginning. The engineers had designed these trials not only around the species, but also around the environment, ensuring that each stage challenged endurance and adaptability. Clouds gathered overhead, darkening unnaturally fast, streaks of electric light crackling across the dome. The wind rose with an eerie wail, bending the foliage, scattering the glowing algae into drifting motes. While others might panic or scramble for technological shelter, Eliza accepted the change as part of the test. She pulled her rope from her belt and sought higher ground, a ridge where fallen branches formed a natural barrier. She lashed together a simple frame of sticks and leaves, creating a lean-to against the slope. It would not hold forever, but it would shield her from the worst of the rain and allow her to keep her supplies dry. Survival was not about resisting the environment with force, but moving with its rhythm. When the rain fell, it came in sheets, pounding the soil into mud, washing tracks away, and filling hollows with rushing water. Eliza crouched beneath her shelter, eyes scanning the torrent for movement. She knew the storm would drive certain species from cover, forcing them to seek higher ground. Where most cadets would curse the weather, she saw opportunity. And so she waited, rope coiled in her hands, eyes steady on the landscape as thunder rolled overhead. The exam was not about speed or strength, no matter what her peers believed. It was about patience, adaptation, and the willingness to use simplicity where complexity failed. She had already proven that once. She would prove it again, storm or no storm. The second capture was secured, but the trial had only begun to reveal its teeth. The storm passed with the same sudden violence with which it had arrived, leaving behind a steaming jungle that glistened with rivulets of rainwater and trembled under the weight of dripping foliage. Eliza stepped from beneath her lean-to, her clothes damp but her supplies intact. The air was sharp with the scent of ozone, mingling with the musk of creatures disturbed from their hiding places. The storm had shifted the balance of the biome, and with it came new opportunities and new dangers. She adjusted her belt, tightened her grip on the coil of rope, and moved cautiously along the ridge. It did not take long before she spotted fresh disturbances in the soaked terrain. The mud bore the unmistakable signs of something heavy, dragging itself forward with deliberate force. The trail was uneven, marked by deep gouges where claws had sunk into soft earth. Eliza crouched and ran her fingers along the impressions, her eyes narrowing as she read the story in the soil. This was no small forager, no nimble scavenger. The size of the tracks, the spread of the claws, and the dragging tail line spoke of a predator the instructors had carefully chosen to test cadets' courage. She followed the trail at a measured distance, staying downwind. Her steps were deliberate, each placed where the soil would yield quietly rather than splash or snap. Ahead, a guttural growl rolled through the underbrush. She moved closer, and the predator revealed itself. A 6-limbed beast, its body covered in thick scales the color of wet stone, its head crowned with jagged ridges that shimmered faintly in the light. Its eyes were pale amber, unblinking, fixed on a cluster of smaller creatures it had pinned beneath its bulk. The smaller animals squealed in panic, but the predator showed no rush. It toyed with them, as if savoring its dominance. Eliza did not flinch. She studied the predator's rhythm, the way it shifted weight from forelimbs to hind limbs, the way its tail flicked before every lunge. This was not an animal driven by hunger alone. It was a creature of territory, one that would not be lured into a simple trap with food. She knew that confronting it directly would be suicide, and fleeing would solve nothing. The exam demanded capture, not avoidance. She would have to outthink it. She circled slowly until she found a natural depression in the terrain, where water had collected into a shallow pool rimmed with exposed roots. She knelt and examined the structure. The roots formed natural anchors, strong enough to hold weight if she reinforced them. She pulled out her knife and cut lengths of vine, knotting them together into a series of loops. Her fingers worked with quiet speed, crafting a snare strong enough to resist the thrashing of a creature far larger than herself. She anchored the loop beneath the water, covering it with mud and foliage to conceal its presence. The trap alone would not be enough. She needed to guide the predator into it, to manipulate its instincts rather than fight them. She scouted nearby and discovered a hollow trunk, wide enough to serve as a resonator. She dragged it into place with effort, positioning it so that when struck it would echo like the cry of another predator. She then gathered stones and arranged them in a pattern, ensuring that when she released the smaller animals from the predator's grasp, they would scatter toward the pool in predictable paths. Her preparation complete, she crept back to the predator. It had grown restless, snapping its jaws over the caged prey. She raised a stone and hurled it against the hollow trunk. The sound thundered through the clearing, a deep reverberation that mimicked the approach of a rival. The predator froze, its ridges rising, its tail whipping with agitation. It roared, a sound of defiance, and in that moment Eliza darted forward, slashing the vines that pinned the smaller animals. They bolted in panic, racing toward the pool as she had intended. The predator lunged after them, its bulk driving through the underbrush with terrifying speed. It barreled into the pool, jaws snapping. The moment its weight pressed into the concealed loop, the snare tightened with brutal efficiency, catching its forelimb and wrenching it sideways. The beast roared, thrashing in fury, its momentum dragging it deeper into the water. Eliza pulled hard on the anchored vines, locking the snare in place. The roots groaned but held. The predator struggled, its body churning the pool into a froth, but the more it fought, the tighter the loop cut against its scales. Eliza did not gloat. She moved with measured calm, checking each anchor, reinforcing knots, and ensuring the beast could not harm itself in the struggle. She marked the capture with the Academy beacon, the light pulsing against the damp air. From the observation platform high above, instructors leaned closer, their eyes betraying astonishment. Few cadets even dared to approach this predator, let alone subdue it without advanced weaponry. Her task was not finished. Beyond the ridge, another cry pierced the humid air, this one sharper, filled with a different rhythm. Eliza recognized it instantly. A pack hunter. Unlike the solitary beast she had just ensnared, this one relied on numbers and coordination. She wiped the mud from her hands, retrieved more vines, and moved toward the sound. In a clearing, she saw them. 3 lean-bodied predators, their hides marked with glowing streaks that pulsed faintly in time with their breathing. They moved in unison, circling a trapped cadet who swung his plasma net desperately, the weapon flickering as its power drained. The cadet was male, a reptilian youth with green-scaled arms and a panicked expression. His strikes were clumsy, his fear obvious. The predators closed in, their coordination flawless. Eliza's instinct was immediate. She could not ignore a fellow cadet, but to intervene directly would expose her. She scanned the clearing quickly. The predators' unity was both their strength and their weakness. They responded to each other's movements with blind trust. If she could disrupt that rhythm, she could scatter them. She gathered long vines and tied them between 2 trees at ankle height, camouflaging them with fallen leaves. She then climbed a branch above the clearing, carrying a handful of stones. She aimed carefully and threw one at the flank of the lead predator. It spun, snarling, and the others followed its gaze. In their charge, 2 tripped over the concealed vines, tumbling into one another. The third lunged blindly, colliding with the cadet's flickering net. The reptilian male stumbled back in shock as the predators snarled in disarray, their formation broken. Eliza dropped from the branch, her rope swinging as she landed. She looped it around the nearest predator's snout, yanking it shut with a practiced motion. The beast thrashed, but she twisted her body, using its momentum to drive it into a tree trunk. She pinned it long enough to bind its jaws. The other two regained footing, but their coordination was shattered. The cadet found his footing and managed to drive them back with renewed desperation. When the predators retreated into the foliage, Eliza tightened her grip on the captured one, securing the ropes until it was safely restrained. She marked it with the beacon, then glanced at the cadet. His wide eyes flicked between her and the subdued beast, disbelief plain on his face. He tried to speak, but no words came, only a stunned shake of his head. Eliza said nothing. She stepped back, wiped the mud from her hands, and disappeared into the trees, leaving him to process what he had witnessed. She had no interest in recognition, only in progress. Each capture was a step forward, each trap a demonstration that the so-called impossible exam was nothing more than a challenge waiting for the right perspective. The jungle loomed around her, alive with sounds of creatures still unseen. Her body ached from exertion, her arms marked by scratches and bruises, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She knew the predators yet to come would be more cunning, more dangerous. But she also knew that instinct could be anticipated, patterns could be read, and traps could be woven from even the simplest materials. The Academy had set this trial to break arrogance. Eliza intended to show that humility and observation were stronger weapons than any plasma rifle. She pushed deeper into the wilderness, her eyes sharp, her mind already searching for the next puzzle to solve. The jungle thickened as Eliza pressed onward, the air growing heavy with the fragrance of blooming spores that glowed faintly in the dusk light. The biome's cycle had shifted, the simulated star descending beyond the dome's curve, leaving the canopy awash in pale violet. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor, merging with pools of phosphorescence where strange fungi pulsed with life. She knew the exam would escalate now. The instructors always saved the hardest challenge for the final stretch, and she had learned enough about their methods to recognize the rhythm. Ahead, the forest opened into a wide clearing dominated by towering trunks that spiraled upward like massive screws into the sky. The ground was littered with feathers, long serrated plumes that shimmered under the faint glow. Eliza crouched, lifting one in her hand. It was light, rigid, tipped with a sharp quill. The sight confirmed what she had suspected. The shriekers were near. The shriekers were not solitary hunters. They moved in coordinated flocks, agile in the air, ruthless in pursuit. Most cadets failed here because the creatures never attacked one at a time. Their wings could slice through branches with ease, and their calls disoriented prey by resonating at disjointed frequencies. To capture even one alive was considered a victory. To capture 3, as the exam required, was deemed impossible. Yet Eliza knew she had no choice. She climbed one of the spiraling trunks, settling onto a branch high above the ground. From this vantage, she could see the forest canopy shift as the flock circled. A dozen shriekers glided in eerie unison, their wings outlined with faint bioluminescence, their eyes reflecting amber fire in the dim light. They cried out in alternating pitches, filling the air with overlapping waves that made the branches tremble. Her stomach tightened at the sound, but her resolve remained unshaken. She studied their formation. Each time the lead shrieker banked, the others followed without hesitation. The leader's cry guided them, and the rest trusted it completely. It was this blind coordination that made them formidable, but also vulnerable. If she could manipulate the leader, she could manipulate them all. Eliza descended silently and began preparing the trap. She selected a cluster of sturdy trunks that formed a natural funnel. With her knife, she stripped long vines, weaving them into nets that she strung high between branches. She reinforced the nets with bent saplings, creating spring-loaded tension that would close with force, but not enough to kill. The labor was exhausting, her arms burning with the effort, but she did not falter. Every knot was checked twice, every anchor tested against her weight. Once the nets were ready, she moved to the bait. The shriekers hunted by sound as much as sight. She carved a hollow from a fallen branch, shaping it into a crude flute. Blowing across its opening, she produced a wavering call that echoed faintly. She adjusted the pitch until it matched the resonance she had heard from the leader. When she sent the sound rolling through the clearing, the effect was immediate. The flock wheeled overhead, their cries rising in response. She positioned herself beneath the nets and called again. The leader dove first, wings slicing the air with lethal precision, followed by two others in perfect formation. Eliza's heart pounded as the rush of wind shook the leaves. At the last moment she shifted aside, her hand yanking free the vine trigger. The nets snapped downward with explosive speed, enveloping the three shriekers in a tangle of fibers. The creatures shrieked in fury, thrashing their wings, but the design held firm. The rest of the flock scattered into the sky, their cries fading into the distance. Eliza approached carefully, watching as the three captives struggled against the nets. She moved quickly, securing their wings with loops of rope to prevent injury. Their eyes glared at her with wild intensity, but she worked with calm precision, adjusting knots so the fibers held without cutting into flesh. Once satisfied, she activated the beacon to mark the capture. The pulsing light washed over the clearing, signaling her success. From above, the instructors watched in stunned silence. Commander Jashkor leaned forward, his ridged face betraying rare surprise. None of the cadets in recorded history had subdued three shriekers alive in a single attempt. The other instructors exchanged murmurs, disbelief giving way to reluctant admiration. Eliza exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. She had anticipated the risk of failure here more than anywhere else, yet the plan had unfolded exactly as she intended. Still, she allowed herself no rest. The exam was not yet finished. The jungle remained alive with unseen dangers, and she knew the designers of this trial would not allow the last stretch to pass easily. She gathered her gear, checked her knots one final time, and looked toward the deep forest where the faint glow of strange lights pulsed like beating hearts. She sensed movement there, slower, heavier, different from the swift fury of the shriekers. Whatever awaited her next would not be conquered with sound and nets alone. She pressed onward, her body weary, but her determination sharpened like steel. Every step carried her closer to the end, yet also deeper into a test that seemed less like an exam and more like a mirror of what humanity was at its core. She walked into the shadows, rope coiled over her shoulder, eyes steady on the horizon of alien trees. The final obstacles were waiting, and she would face them not with bravado, but with the quiet certainty that had carried her this far. The faint glow ahead resolved into a grove unlike any Eliza had seen in the biome. Towering plants with translucent trunks pulsed with light from within, their branches casting shifting patterns across the ground. The air here was warmer, dense with the scent of resin, and filled with a low hum as though the grove itself breathed. Eliza's steps slowed as her eyes adjusted to the strange radiance. She had captured 9 species, each requiring patience, cunning, and adaptation. Only one remained, and she knew instinctively that this grove was its domain. From the shadows emerged the final challenge. A colossal insectoid creature crawled forward, its body armored with plates that shimmered like molten bronze. Its mandibles clicked rhythmically, and its multifaceted eyes glowed faintly green in the dim light. Unlike the predators she had faced before, this one did not rush. It moved with deliberate slowness, its limbs heavy yet controlled, every motion exuding strength. The instructors had saved the largest and most dangerous for last. Eliza crouched behind a root, watching the creature. She observed its behavior carefully. It scraped its mandibles against a trunk, leaving trails of resin that glistened. It turned in circles, tracing a perimeter with uncanny precision. She realized quickly that it was territorial, marking boundaries rather than hunting. If she tried to bait it with food, it would ignore her. If she attacked directly, its armor would turn aside any crude weapon she could fashion. To capture it, she needed to use its instincts against it. She examined the grove with sharp eyes, mapping the way the trunks leaned toward the center, the way vines dangled like ropes ready to be claimed. The hum in the air came not from the creature, but from the resonance of the trunks themselves, vibrating faintly as wind passed through their hollow cores. An idea formed, one that required daring and precision in equal measure. She began weaving a net from the thickest vines she could find, layering them until the fibers formed a mesh strong enough to hold the weight of a creature several times her size. She worked quickly, sweat beading on her forehead as she tied knot after knot, her muscles aching but steady. When the net was ready, she climbed the trunks, hauling it upward and draping it across branches so that it hung loosely above the clearing. She anchored it to a trigger she fashioned from a bent branch and a wedge of stone. The trap was set, but she needed to draw the creature beneath it. She carved a sharp groove into one of the glowing trunks, releasing a gush of resin that spilled onto the ground. The scent filled the grove with an intoxicating sweetness, and the insectoid creature immediately turned toward it. Its mandibles clicked faster, its legs carrying it forward with surprising speed. It lowered its head to investigate the fresh resin, its attention focused entirely on the source. Eliza waited, her breath caught in her chest. She held the vine trigger tightly, her fingers curled around it with white-knuckled determination. The creature moved directly beneath the suspended net, its armored back glinting in the eerie light. She pulled. The net dropped with a thunderous crash, vines snapping taut as the heavy mesh engulfed the insectoid. The creature roared, thrashing violently, its mandibles clacking in fury as it tried to slice through the bindings. The grove shook with its struggle, but Eliza had reinforced the knots well, layering them so that each pull only tightened the snare further. She leapt from her perch and rushed to the side, securing the ends of the net around the trunks. The creature thrashed, its limbs crashing against the glowing wood, but the trunks held firm. With every movement, the net sank deeper into the grooves of its armor, binding it tighter. Eliza moved quickly, adjusting ropes and adding reinforcements until the creature's struggles slowed. Its mandibles clicked weakly, its eyes still glowing with rage, but its body was immobilized. She stepped back, chest heaving, mud streaking her arms and face. The final capture was secured. She activated the last beacon, the light flashing bright above the grove. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the faint hum of the glowing trunks. Then, from the dome's sky, the announcement came. The trial was over. The barrier shimmered back into place, the artificial jungle dissolving into static before fading entirely. Eliza stood in the center of a barren training hall now, the captured creatures transported to containment chambers along the perimeter. The cadets who had survived the ordeal reappeared around her, their bodies battered, their expressions dazed. Many had failed early, some carried wounds, others carried shame. Yet every gaze turned to her, the human who had endured to the very end. From the observation platform, Commander Jashkor descended with slow, deliberate steps. His reptilian face betrayed little emotion, but his eyes studied her with intensity. He stopped before her, his towering frame casting a long shadow. For a moment he said nothing, only watching her as though searching for weakness. Finally, his voice rumbled through the hall. In the history of this academy, no cadet has ever achieved a complete capture. You stand alone. The other instructors joined him, their murmurs swelling into open discussion. Some questioned how she had done it without advanced tools. Others spoke of instinct and ingenuity. Still others admitted grudging admiration. But the scoreboard above silenced all debate. For the first time, the word perfect glowed in blazing letters, Eliza's name etched beside it. She did not smile, nor did she raise her head in triumph. She simply stood with quiet composure, her body exhausted, but her mind steady. She had proven what she came to prove. Not only that survival was possible without reliance on technology, but that understanding, patience, and simplicity could overcome even the most elaborate challenges. The cadets watched her, their expressions shifting from disbelief to respect. The reptilian male she had once helped lowered his gaze, acknowledging her silently. Even those who had mocked her before now saw her with new eyes. She had demonstrated not just skill, but something deeper, an approach that transcended the arrogance of machines. As the hall emptied and the instructors withdrew, Eliza remained for a moment longer, her eyes tracing the fading glow of the scoreboard. She knew her path at the academy would never be the same again. She had set a precedent, one that would ripple through the ranks for years to come. The trial was no longer impossible. The barrier had been broken, and it was a human who had done it. When she finally walked out into the cool air of Kepler Station, she carried no trophies, no weapons, no outward sign of her triumph. What she carried instead was the knowledge that simplicity could triumph over complexity, that patience could overcome panic, and that humanity's legacy of survival was far from primitive. It was, in truth, a strength that no technology could replicate. And for the first time since the exam had begun, she allowed herself a faint smile, quiet and private, as she stepped forward into the future she had just reshaped.